Okay, so we're looking at Isaiah chapter 11. And so I've called it the branch and the spirit. So this is about a person that Isaiah calls a branch. It turns out that Jeremiah also refers to the same person and says he's a branch, and so does Zechariah. So it's a few prophets. Isaiah's the first of them. So I'm going to read, first of all, verse 1.
Oops.
A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. Who was Jesse? I can hear a few rumbles, but I can't hear any words. What? Can't hear what anybody's saying.
She's saying King David's father.
King David's father, thank you. So this is from David's family, King David's family. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. And so I found this little picture, but I've seen this kind of thing, and I'm sure you have. You cut down a tree, and then you think it's gone, but lo and behold, there is this branch that comes up from there, and occasionally it can also, depending on the tree, it can come from a runner a bit further away, and then you've got a new tree. And the new one can be bigger than the one that was cut down. So what's this all about, that this shoot will come up, this stump, and so a stump means it's been cut down. So that's referring to the kings that are in David's family, that are the kings of Judah and Israel. Okay? So the kingdom, at this point, the kingdom of the land of Israel is divided into two kingdoms. The one in the south is called Judah, where the Jews come from, and the one at the top was called Israel at this time. So, from the southern kingdom, which all came from King David's family, the kings did, it got cut down. Not in Isaiah's time, but he's looking ahead. You know, he's always looking ahead. He's looking ahead, and he sees a time when there's going to be punishment for the people, and there's going to be the kings cut off. They will no longer have a king there. And there's going to be war. And there's going to be a taking over of Jerusalem. All of that was fulfilled. So the time in that future will be when people think the kings of Israel are dead, kings of Judah are dead, the land is dead, and that's the end of the Jews. As he said, but even though the stump, there is only a stump left, and even though the kings have been all cut off, there's this branch. And this branch turns out to be representing a very, very, very special person. And so it's referred to as the branch. So it's just one of these. Can we do the next one? Right. So if we go back in Isaiah to follow on from the bit that we talked about last week, in Isaiah 6, the chapter where Isaiah is called, Isaiah asks the question of how long am I going to be having to talk to these people, God? You know, you're sending me. God said, whom shall I send? Isaiah said, send me. And he says, until the cities lie ruined. That's not a great thought, is it? But it's the first time in the book of Isaiah, I think it's the first time, it's one of the first, when it's this clear that, well, maybe I should take that back. It's one of the times. I'm thinking of there is another one too. And it says, when the cities lie ruined and without inhabitants, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. Sends people far away into the land of Babylon. That's going to be the exile. That's future, future, future. And although a tenth remains in the land, that's representing a small number, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak trees leave stumps when they're cut down. So the holy seed will be the stump in the land. So they've got a lot of tree images. And in fact, in all of the prophets, you get these tree images. And so what does a tree represent? It can represent a king, or it can represent a nation, a people. So here, he's talking about, when the people are cut down, represented by these trees, there's still going to be a holy seed as a stump in the land. So, that doesn't mean that everything's finished yet. I just want to look at one more passage too that's relevant. Isaiah 10, this is just at the end of it, the very last verses. God's got something to say about the enemies too, because the enemies, although the enemies are going to be the ones that come and cause ruin in the land, the enemies are going to get their just deserts from God as well. Now, why is all this ruin going to happen to Israel? Judah, it's all the same. It's because they haven't been obedient to the Lord, it's because they've been turning away, and it's because they've been doing a whole lot of wrong stuff. But God still has something for the enemies. So we're just going to read 33 and 34, the very last verses in that chapter. See, the Lord Almighty will lop off the boughs with great power. The lofty trees, lofty stands for arrogant leaders. The arrogant baddies will be felled. The tall ones will be brought low. Tall, they're up there and they think they're better than everybody else. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Who's going to be doing the cutting down? God. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one. So this is another tree image. This time it's the baddies. Lots of arrogant, tall trees. And God is the one who is going to cut them down. Now, if you think in the New Testament of Mary's song, when she hears that there's going to be, she's going to be the mother to this baby, she says there about how the mighty are cut down and how the humble are lifted up. She's actually quoting from the Old Testament, from Hannah's song. But this theme of the humble being lifted up and they are mighty, the arrogant mighty it really means, being brought down, that's really a recurrent theme right through the whole Old Testament. But there's tree images there, and there's a chapter in Ezekiel, I won't read it right now, which describes all of the kings in terms of trees. Different kinds of trees, and then God does things with that and sends, describes what's going to happen as prophecy as well. So, people understand, trees can be leaders, trees can be people. It's just like shepherds in Israel can be kings. Some of them didn't do much shepherding, but, that's, some of them were called bad shepherds. But anyway, so we're dealing with trees today, so we'll stick with trees. So this branch, what's he going to be like? We know that he's going to be from King David's family. So he's got to be, in that line. That's all we know about him so far. But the most important thing to know is not that. Being a member of a royal family or having the right blood flowing through your veins is not going to be enough to give you all of the leadership skills that you're going to need to be this kind of leader. So, can we go to the next one, please? The most important thing that's said is in verse 2. And verse 2 and 3. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the spirit of counsel and of power, the spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. This is a different kind of leader. This is not a leader who is going to physical war, because the kind of warfare that he's engaging in is from words. And they're going to knock people out simply because he's speaking words that are of this character. And some people can't cope with that. And I want to go back and look at these characteristics. Some people say, but the Holy Spirit's not in the Old Testament. It only starts at Pentecost. Not true. I did a whole course teaching a few years ago, and the course was the Spirit of God in the Old Testament. And we did a whole term of the Spirit, just verses and verses and verses about the Spirit of God in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, it's only called the Holy Spirit, I think, about 2 or at the most 3 times. Mostly it's called the Spirit of God. Here it's the Spirit of the Lord. It's the same thing. God doesn't have different kinds of spirits. God only has one kind of spirit, that is the Holy Spirit. So what are the characteristics of the Spirit that the Spirit is giving, that the Holy Spirit is giving to this branch who we know ends up being Jesus? It says that this person has the spirit of wisdom and understanding. Isn't that needed for someone in leadership? Now, if we look at the book of Proverbs and books around that area, we find that wisdom is such a huge, huge thing. And often it's something that we don't talk about much these days. How many young people come and say, I really, really, really want to learn wisdom? I haven't yet met one in Australia. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But I've taught so many classes in other countries where they come and say, oh man, will you please teach us about wisdom? We really need to learn wisdom so that we can live well. I think of that in India so much, where they're craving wisdom, good, proper, godly wisdom, so they know how to live well. I think the kids that Reagan's dealing with probably don't yet know how to say that. But there's a lot of kids who feel it, but they don't know where to look and they don't know how to express it. But I just think of the thirst for wisdom that I've had not only in India but in other countries as well, and I haven't heard it here. And I think that's very, very sad. So the spirit of wisdom and understanding is absolutely essential. And I think of a lovely word in Hebrew, takbalot. You don't have to learn it. It's just one of those words that I just happen to think sounds kind of fun. It really means the art of steering your life in a good direction. Being able to steer through things that come along. Well, that's pretty much what I need to be trying to do all the time. The second category is, what is this Holy Spirit giving him? Counsel and of power. Now, there's no talk here of, getting your machine gun out. It's not that sort of power. But there is power in speaking the truth. There is power to be able to answer people who are trying to trap you. Jesus showed that, didn't he? When the Pharisees were, up to no good and they were really trying to challenge him, him. I mean, they should have known if they actually read their Bibles. But it's the power to be able to take down evil through a word, through something that is said, that can really be powerful. The third category is knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. What sort of knowledge is this? It's not just learning your numbers, your arithmetic, or your spelling, or your certain facts about insects or whatever it is that you're interested in. It's not that stuff. But it's knowledge of God. It is knowing God's character so well that you have absorbed it and it's coming out in the way you live. It's coming out in what you say and what you choose to do. The fear of the Lord. You're not the ultimate authority. God is. And what's the end result here? Well, we have two words, and there will be a third word if we read a bit further on in a few minutes. The two words we see about his behaviour and how he's exercising leadership is righteousness and faithfulness. Righteousness and faithfulness. It could be translated, justice. Well, it is faithfulness. It's in verse 5. Righteousness and faithfulness. See, righteousness and justice go together as well. Hebrew words are not quite the same as ours. So there are a few different translations. But righteousness and faithfulness. This is someone you can depend on. This is someone who will do everything, who is so good, so thoroughly good, that everything you know will be right. And I can remember when I was a kid, I went to go to Sunday school because I became friends with a new girl in our school. And then I soon found out that her father was a minister of a local church. And so soon she invited me to go to Sunday school. And so I went along. And they just lived down our street, so I got to know the family well. And I was in and out of their house a lot, just as she was in and out of my house. I was asking questions. What's your father really like? What's he really like at home? I used to ask him questions too. I can remember he didn't normally wear a dog collar, but I saw dog collars being on the washing line, a dog collar and a cloth that used to be there. And so I went to him one day and I said, but you don't wear dog collars, and why have you got them on the washing line? I just kind of came out with it, and he was very kind. He explained that when you go into the hospitals, they won't let you in unless you're wearing that. So that explained it. Okay, didn't wear it any other time because he wasn't really convinced that they were appropriate or anything, but he did wear it then. But I kept asking and kept looking at the whole family. Is this genuine? Is there integrity here? Or is this just something that he talks about when he does his sermons? And I couldn't find any mismatch at all. I just couldn't. Now, I've talked with that girl in recent years, and she couldn't really say any either. She wished that he could have had more time with the family. That was the worst she could come up with. But you see, everybody around had the same view. Why? Because there was absolute integrity. Now, that's what I'd expect of somebody who is following God and walking in the Holy Spirit. He even went to visit my father of all people, in hospital. And that's how I found out that he prayed for people in hospital, and there were many, many examples of people being miraculously healed. I found out that through my father. And then I said that to him, and he said, "Oh, I'm not supposed to say that from the pulpit in this church." Because it's one of those churches where, you weren't really supposed to talk much about the Holy Spirit doing miracles or anything. But he said, "Oh, that's the truth. That's just what happens. I just pray when I feel moved by God to pray, and God does the rest." And but so he was just a mini example of Jesus to me. He wasn't Jesus. And I'm sure I did have faults if I'd really, been able to know more. But that's what you look for, isn't it? You look for integrity. You look for consistency. And that's why I'm very pleased that faithfulness is there. Somebody who's dependably mirroring God. It's so much part of them. You see, Jesus could not possibly, or anybody could not possibly be the kind of leader that's really needed universally without the Spirit of the Lord. This is a supernatural power, supernatural gifting. And I just thought it'd be interesting to have a quick look at the spiritual gifts in the New Testament. And there are a couple of this, but I'm just looking at one in 1 Corinthians 12, verses 7 to 11. It's got a few gifts here. I'm just going to list them and see how much well they add up, they line up with the gifts that are there in Isaiah 11. The first one that's mentioned in 1 Corinthians, verse 8, is wisdom. Well, that's the first one that comes here in Isaiah 11. The next one is knowledge, and that's mentioned there too. And then there's faith. Well, we don't have that mentioned as such in Isaiah 11. But then we have gifts of healing and miraculous powers and prophecy and distinguishing between spirits and speaking in different tongues. Those ones are not specifically mentioned, but what we do have is an indication of amazing power through his speech. And we do have the counsel and power and knowledge and fear of the Lord and all of those things that you never know how God is going to use the person. I just thought we'd do that. Now, there's also a list of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5. That probably doesn't have quite so strong a correlation. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, that's there. And I would say love is there even though it's not mentioned as a specific characteristic, but it has to be when you take them all together. Gentleness, self-control. I think that self-control is also implied. So they're not exactly the same lists, but we can see overlaps. We're not talking about the effects of a different spirit. We're talking about the effects of the same spirit. Next picture, please. In verses 6 to 9, it also goes on to say about a very, very, very unusual sense of peace. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This is a picture of peace, extreme peace, such that we cannot imagine. This goes beyond politeness because animals are not polite. You know, when we go walking down at Kingston Beach, you know, with people who have their dogs, as it's a dog beach, or part of it is, one of the things I look for is, you know, how does the dog look like the owner? Does the dog behave like the owner? You know, what sort of relationship is there? Sometimes it's not so clear, but sometimes it is. You know, lots of people say that, you know, your animal becomes like the owner in temperament. And, you know, I remember being told all Alsatian dogs are really fierce and they're aggressive and they're horrible, don't ever have anything to do with them, don't ever go near them. Wendy's shaking her head because she used to have one. And she's saying they're beautiful. And my aunt had one, and so, I mean, you know, first of all, I was terrified. I mean, how can an Alsatian dog, how can you possibly have one as a pet?
I've got a chihuahua and it says, get over here and I'll rip you to pieces. You come near my mother.
It depends how they treat it.
Depends how you treat it. You see, that's the whole point. It does. And what does that say about the branch? Jesus, the owner. This is how we've got to see it. Because the lion is owned by the Prince of Peace. And if you've got the lion, the child, and a lamb, and they're all following the same owner, some of them might be owned but they're rebelling, then that is the only way that you can get this absolutely, well, can I say, unnatural but supernatural kind of peace. It's hard enough to imagine that between countries, between the people in the same country, the same street. I think of Northern Ireland, where, you know, one student had to say, I'm sorry I could not submit my essay on time because our house was bombed. And so I have to wait till I can get to a computer. And then I can finish the essay. That's when I was teaching in England. This is who we follow. The Prince of Peace, who is righteous and faithful. And we have to, who is filled with all of these other gifts. And this is who we are promoting. Although sometimes when I look at American politics, I wonder. This is the Prince of Peace. And this is the one whose message we are to bring.